What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Rocky Review series, and now we are at the 6th chapter titled simply Rocky Balboa, and a film that quite literally was the rejuvenation for not only this franchise, but Sylvester Stallone's career. So as we discussed in the Rocky V review, the critical and audience reception of that film was by a landslide the lowest of the entire franchise, and Rocky Balboa was a character that did not see the light of day for 16 years. And so 2006 was an interesting time for not only Stallone, but the Rocky franchise, because it had been a long time since the ending that most fans did not appreciate in Rocky V. Stallone, his career had pretty much been in the toilet for a while. The role that he did previous to returning as the triumphant Rocky Balboa was the villain in Spy Kids 3D.
What we want? Time on this planet is over. It belongs now to our youth.
And so once whispers and rumblings started to be tossed around that Stallone was actually going to be doing another Rocky film, that he was going to be directing it, which was the first time he had been in the director's chair since 1985 with Rocky IV, a lot of people got curious. I'm sure a lot of people got very pessimistic or maybe a little cynical, but nonetheless, everybody was curious of how this was going to turn out. And for me personally, this was actually my introduction to the Rocky franchise. My two best friends in high school were really hyped, really pumped for this movie. Everybody was talking about it. Up to that point, I had never really watched a full Rocky film. I'd seen pieces of them throughout my childhood, but never sat down and given them an honest chance. And so because my dad was excited about it as well, and it was pretty much guaranteed that I was going to be going with him to the movie theater, I finally sat down and watched the Rocky movies back to back before we eventually saw the 6th film. And while it didn't necessarily hit me my first watch through how much I was eventually going to love these movies and this character, I definitely enjoyed all of them, to the point where Rocky V especially, I was like, this is the one people hate? Why? And then you fast forward to the release of the film, and most critics, the vast majority of fans, really loved this film, much preferred this as a closing chapter to the character and to the franchise, really appreciated Sylvester Stallone's performance as well as his directing, and this quite literally saved this franchise and set it up for what would eventually become the Creed spin-offs that have gone on to be pretty successful with fans and critics, as well as absolutely rejuvenated Sylvester Stallone's career to where he eventually revisited Rambo 2 more times. He did the Expendables series, started doing a couple of movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger like Escape Plan. You get little cool B movies like Bullet to the Head. He's in Guardians of the Galaxy. None of that would have been possible without Rocky Balboa, because there was that stretch there where Sylvester Stallone felt like this relic of the 80s. So starting off with the positives, I think that Sylvester Stallone did a phenomenal job at recapturing the heart and the tone and the appeal of the most popular Rocky films, namely the first one. There's a lot of nostalgia, there's a lot of sentimental value here, there's a lot of callbacks directly to that original film, and especially at the time of release, with Rocky V being the last taste that everybody had from this franchise, a 16-year hiatus, that was exactly what everybody who was a Rocky fan needed. It was just such a movie that appealed to your love and all of your nostalgia that it just brought everybody to this point of celebration of the franchise. And he was able to do that while very competently bringing in a lot of modern themes with an aging boxer, with a has-been boxer, with somebody who's facing their mortality, facing life being alone without his wife there. All these different elements that, again, like I've said before, just makes Rocky Balboa one of the most celebrated and best portrayed characters in movie history, because we've gotten the joy to be able to see this character at so many different points in his life, and continuing on with the Creed franchise, that you really feel like you get every single angle and aspect of who this character is throughout his entire lifetime. The way that they evolve the relationship between him and his son, the way that they continue to build the relationship between him and Paulie, the way that they revisit some of the older relationships like Spider Rico, the guy that the Rocky franchise opens up with him fighting, or Little Marie, the girl from the first film. So many things were just building upon what we loved in this movie. And while now, in current times, 2023, I would argue that nostalgia is starting to get kind of burnt out, starting to get a little bit overrated and become a bit of a crutch for modern movie making. I think Rocky Balboa is one of those prime examples of a movie that does it right, because it takes everything that we know and love if you are a hardcore fan or even a casual fan, but it builds upon it and it uses that as a springboard for a modern story that merits its existence. I also think this is one of the best performances that Sylvester Stallone gives in this franchise, because he really harnesses what we love about Rocky. There was something I said about part 3 especially, but even elements of part 4, to where Stallone kind of lost a little bit of Rocky's charm. He lost a little bit of those Rocky-isms and put a lot more of his 80s persona into the character of Rocky there. And some people agree with that, some people don't, but Rocky 1, Rocky 2, elements of Rocky 5, but especially this one. This one really harkens back to why we endeared ourselves to the character in the first place, and why we appreciate him and look up to him and what he stands for because of his good nature, his good heart, some of his simple-minded outlook on the world. And there's even a point where he addresses that in the film to his son directly, where he's like, you don't think about the world the way that everybody else does. You got to think like yourself. And that's something that I've always loved about this character. And so he totally tapped back into that with the way that he portrayed Rocky in this movie. And then, of course, you have the physical performance. I mean, Sylvester Stallone's always been a big bad motherfucker, but whenever he gets into the ring in the last act of this film, and they filmed this fight with real punches, him and the actor that portrays Mason Dixon actually hitting each other, it's been known to be hailed as one of the most realistic boxing fights ever, because it was. And Sylvester Stallone's one of those guys where even after he springboards off of this and does some of the crazy stuff that he did in the first Expendables movie, breaking his neck during stunt work and everything, this dude's a monster. I mean, there's never a line in the movie that actually addresses it. I wish there was, but he's portrayed as a joke the whole movie. He's called an old man, a has-been. Everybody's looking down on him. Everybody's expecting him to just get destroyed and it'd be this absolute embarrassment. And whenever he takes that robe off in the third act to start that final fight, I just wanted somebody to look at him and be like, oh yeah, you about to fuck around and find out, Mason. I also really love what they do with Paulie in this movie. And I think this competes with Rocky IV for the best representation of that character. And if you've seen my previous reviews, you know that I'm kind of up in the air throughout this entire franchise about how I feel about Paulie, because there's so many things about him where he's a scumbag and he's a piece of shit and he's done things quite directly to hurt Rocky and especially Adrian. And at the same time, you see kind of more the sensitive side of him. You see more of the schlub charm there. And he is a very important character to Rocky. But in this film, I think it's the best balance, because you see him as being an alcoholic. You see him as being this very blunt, kind of antagonistic, pessimistic person. And at the same time, you see that best friend angle. This is the movie that best shows why Rocky continues to be friends with this guy and why he probably always was friends with him. You know, he's got his rough around the edges stuff. He's got to take the good with the bad, and there's a lot of bad, but you see things here to where, especially in the absence of Adrian, with her not being in the film, where he has to kind of really rise up to be the second character of the movie, actually, and Burt Young's the second name that you see in the opening credits. You see that side of him that is very much an important piece of Rocky's motivation, an important piece of Rocky's family and his heart, and those two characters really do need each other in certain ways.
Taco! The last round of your life! Come on, guys. The last round! Come on.
Especially the humor that comes across. It was very well written and very well delivered by Burt Young. I love the line where Rocky's thinking about getting back in the ring, wants to get a little bit of money, and Burt Young says, you know, why don't you just put a sign that says, come and punch me in the face for $5, you make a killing. Or when Duke is talking to him and giving Rocky kind of a rundown of all of the limitations that he's going to have during training, about your knees are blown out, so we can't really do a whole lot of running, and you've got a bad back, so you can't really do this, and you got calcium deposits on your knuckles, so we can't really do this. And then Burt Young looks at him and is like, I've had that problem too. And as a springboard of something that I think is underappreciated and underrated about Rocky V, the relationship that Rocky has with his son, I really like the way that they continue that here. And even the way that they continue it a little bit in Creed 2 from where we find them here, to where there's this contention between them, in the absence of Adrian especially, to where Rocky clearly still has a lot of love for his son. He wants to have that relationship, but there's like a block there to where his son's trying to become his own man, trying to get out of the shadow of his father, doesn't necessarily probably like a lot of the decisions that his father has made. Maybe there's some grief there with the absence of his mother, but there's not the most loving relationship between the two of them. And the probably my favorite line of the entire franchise, to the point where I have a poster on my wall. I have a piece of art on my wall that has the text of this scene, where he tells him about how life is going to beat you down to your knees, and it's not about how hard you can hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward.
The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it.
That is a line that I have seen used for inspiration, and I've seen clipped and memed and everything to death, because it's genuinely like, in a bubble, that is Rocky. That is the inspirational side of Rocky that has always been there and that we have always valued. And as a catalyst conversation for the change of heart that his son has, I think it's one of the most brilliant scenes, written and performed, of this entire franchise. And his son finally coming around to understanding his father and respecting his father and being in his corner during the fight, I loved all of that. And I will give Rocky Balboa the credit of possibly doing the best job I have ever seen at creating a completely platonic male and female relationship between Rocky and little Marie. In a lesser hand of a writer and director, that would have come across as a romantic interest. It probably would have been explored as a romantic interest. And I love the fact that Sylvester Stallone keeps all of that at arm's length and just has her be somebody that Rocky sees as needing a little bit of help, needing a helping hand, needing a friend, needing a father figure for her son, and just steps into that void. You know, a little girl that he walked down the street and tried to give her some life lessons, and she gave him the big fuck you in the middle of the first film, and him revisiting that relationship and still trying to be that mentor. And even to the point where she gives him a kiss on the lips before his fight, it never feels like it's going in a romantic direction. It just feels like these are two people that have lost and have fought and have had hardships that kind of lean on each other a little bit for experience and for help and for support. And I thought that they did that brilliantly. Moving on to the mixed, I will say that this is not one of the most rewatchable Rocky films, in my opinion, because there is such a heavy emphasis on nostalgia and sentimental value towards previous films, and using archival footage and direct recreations of certain things, going back to the original locations in the first film. I mean, the first half of the movie, at least, is really reliant on a lot of that. And it's wonderful for Rocky fans, especially back in 2006. That was exactly the medicine that we needed. And when I go through this franchise, it really does hit those sentimental notes that I do think are well done and not just manipulation. So I really genuinely enjoy how they do that. But at the same time, a lot of this movie relies on that. So if you're somebody that doesn't have a lot of sentimental value for the first film or the franchise, if you're somebody that has never seen some of the other Rocky films, this is not a chapter that you can jump into, to where I think you can jump into 2 and 3 and 4, and to a degree 5, and get an idea of the movie's previous and can follow along with the story very well. But this is something that's just like a gift for the fans and a gift for the character of Rocky. And so I don't think it stands on its own as well as it does as a companion piece to the previous 5 films. And now moving on to the negatives, and the only genuine negative that I have with this film is the way that they portray the character of Mason Dixon, the person that is the current heavyweight champion and is challenging Rocky, and Rocky eventually boxes in the 3rd act. I feel like there was a big missed opportunity there to have kind of a duality between their motivations for this fight.
You one crazy old man. You'll get there.
And they hint at it with one scene. There's a scene early on in the film, I think it's in the 1st act, to where Mason Dixon goes and visits one of his old trainers who is not a part of his team anymore now that he's big and rich and famous and a big shot. And they kind of talk a little bit about his early days and his drive and his pride and what got him where he is, and his trainer's telling him about, you're somebody who needs a challenge. You're somebody that needs something to build yourself up to and something to overcome. And I feel like they should have explored that more, because beyond that scene, they pretty much just characterize Mason Dixon as a loud, arrogant, cocky dickhead that just wants to shut everybody up about this little video game that played on ESPN.
It's already over.
Ain't nothing over till it's over.
What's that from, in the 80s?
It's probably in the 70s.
And I just feel like that was a missed opportunity, because they don't need to make this guy a dick. They don't need to make him kind of a subtle villain of the movie. He could easily just be somebody that in his current place has something that is similar to one of the many things that Rocky had to overcome throughout the first 4 or 5 films, and just have them kind of be somebody that exhibition fight is going to be something that's going to drive both of them and going to give both of them the thing that they need. And so by the end of it, when Rocky loses, as he should, narratively, you're not walking away going, whatever, another victory for that dickhead. Like, you kind of walk away going, okay, good for Mason. Like, Rocky got what he needed, the demons are gone, the beast is gone, as he said. He gets that redemption, everything feels whole and come to full circle. And this other character that we were just introduced to in this movie, I like where his story is likely going to go now because of this exhibition fight. And I just never feel that way. I always feel like that one scene is good and setting up something that the rest of the movie kind of abandons. And it makes me want Rocky to beat him. And that should never be the point of the fight in this movie. The point should just be Rocky proving to himself and everybody else that he still has it, and that his heart's still beating. It's the last thing that ages. All of those things. Very similar to the first film, to where winning the fight is not the victory. But I want it to be the victory because I don't like the character of Mason. Overall, guys, I think this is a very good chapter in the Rocky Balboa franchise. I think that it is a damn good ending for that character before we revisit him as a side character in the Creed franchise. And even if we never got Creed, if this was the last we ever saw of Rocky, I think it's a really well done final note. Much better than Rocky V, despite how much defense I have for that film. It's a good landing point for the character and for the franchise. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for a playlist of all of my Rocky reviews so far. We got one more to go with Creed, because I reviewed Creed 2 when it came out, and then Creed 3 will be on Thursday. So please like, share, and hit that subscribe button so you do not miss those reviews. And as always, please remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.